A dystopian future like so many others, and yet, unlike all of them, being unique in and of itself. The danger of ultra-violent professional sports being used to distract and control the masses, the whole pandem et circenses, the bread and circuses of the ancient pagan Roman Empire, referenced at least in motif in the film, but projected into the future when giant monopolies, corporations controlling certain aspects of our lives on Earth, pit their own sports teams against one another to keep people distracted and entertained by the brutality. John Beck, who in the future will have fame on Dallas. James Caan, the incomparable Sonny Corleone from The Godfather, and so many other things. Norman Jewison, the director, 1975, Rollerball. Jonathan E., played by James Caan, is a superstar professional athlete, along with Moon Pie, played by John Beck, member of his team. They perform as their trios, which compete against one another in this thing that is ultimately very dangerous, a very hard metal ball. You have padding, you have gear, you have the famous spiked gloves. There's so much violence in it. It almost looks like something between a life-size roulette wheel, a roller derby, and a pinball machine, but with live people in there and often extreme bloody injuries and even death resulting in the execution of the sport. The future in which they live, various corporate monopolies which control things like energy production, luxury production, different aspects of life, dominate the surface of the earth, not governments. The corporations have become the governments. In order to keep people distracted and entertained, each of these corporate entities has its own rollerball team, and so the plot unfolds. Jonathan E. has been successful. He has been too successful in a corporate model like this one, which is hegemonic in design. Anybody who stands out, anybody who is better than anyone else, anyone who garners attention or around whom a cult of personality may form, is dangerous to the status quo. Ultimately, the corporation asks him to retire. They want him to step away, to stop drawing attention to himself. He does not wish to retire. Other subplots involve people playing around with weapons that destroy entire trees, which psychologically is a big part of this future. The decadence and depravity of the corporate elite lounging around like Romans in the height of their debauchery, doing debaucherous things. The vast separation then between the ordinary worker, the corporate elite, and the people who labor away in the middle. The people who put on the entertainments are the ones that have special privileges. They have certain promotions, attention, certain benefits are given to them, but they're all trapped in this sort of infernal system. Putting him in successively more dangerous and precarious situations, the corporation tries to wear down Jonathan E., realizing that he doesn't want to step away, that they can't risk too much of a public brouhaha about why he doesn't want to step away or why they want to push him to retire. They decide instead that they will cripple him by taking away his popularity, by taking away all of this string of victories that he's had. They will destroy him in the arena. They will destroy him in the game, taking away some of the popularity and fan support. It would be their ultimate victory. And it does not work out that way, though the end of the film leaves it rather ambiguous. As he does continue to stand up to them, as he does continue to struggle, it looks like he's not going to make it. But we end with people chanting his name and the trembling fear of people in the corporate box watching this take place. One of the things that really makes this film stand out, besides obviously when you've got James Caan in a role like this, who does such an excellent job, it comes away, the performance, the presentation, the visuals, even for 1975, this is really some incredible stuff that they put together. And you can look up the history of where they filmed it on location, how they found all those extras to look like it was Japan. Really interesting stuff being filmed in Europe. Lots of background on that. But it is reminiscent to me of Starship Troopers. the great movie so much later that the intention of it was to be cynical and to make you see the emptiness of sort of the patriotic flag waving. But that film is actually very inspiring to people that lean that way. So it was a much better movie than it planned on being. Rollerball, Norman Jewison has talked at length about how he wanted to be very critical about contact sports. He hated contact sports. He was outraged when people tried to license Rollerball from him because they wanted to do a real version of it, presumably with less blood and fatality, maybe. He's horrified because you didn't get the point of the story. His whole point, apparently, was that one man ultimately cannot make a difference. His point was against this corporate power and this might you can't survive. And his point was these violent sports are just horrible, horrible, degenerate things. But his film actually does such a good job of depicting all of this that it can lead you to the very opposite conclusion. That wasn't my takeaway. The guy tells us what his film is about. Afterwards, I heard this. That wasn't my takeaway from Rollerball. In fact, what's interesting, there are those that would say it's a rather communist film, and that might have been his intention from the sounds of it, that it's negative about corporate power. On the other hand, what we see is not a free market society. We see various monopolies in absolute control of aspects of life. If you allow corporate entities to have these monopolies, if they are able to weasel into that position, they become tyrannies. It's almost as if you took a thoroughly Marxist, Stalinist society even, and gave each of the separate branches of the 5-year plan their autonomy, rather than answering to a central Politburo or communist dictator. By allowing these monolithic monopolies to exist that control all aspects of each of their specific specialties, all you've done is removed Stalin and allowed each of the branches of the communist Soviet Union to govern themselves. There's nothing free market or capitalist about any of this stuff. It is all based deeply on monopolies. Monopolies so powerful that they no longer need government in the traditional sense. They negotiate between themselves what they need. Their consumers are literally captive to a monopoly. You've got to deal with each monopoly in each of its zone. Whatever it is you're trying to purchase, you can't get electricity without dealing with energy and power monopoly. It is really not capitalist. It is not free market. It is not a commentary, really, not logically, on Wall Street or anything else. It is really a critique of communist control. And like any tyranny, then, the need for bread and circuses, the need for Rollerball. And Rollerball itself ends up not being the way Jewison describes it. The fact that the one man, Jonathan E., can become so popular through this sport, the very thing that they need to entertain the masses, is the thing that potentially undermines the monopoly. That rising up through the ranks in an almost leader mythos, fascist sort of thing, rising up through the ranks is this man that, because he's so good at what he does, entertaining the people, so good at what he does, exercising his skill in the game, that people look up to him as an individual. In a world where they only have monopolies and boards and corporate entities to look up to, they find a hero in this guy that is raw, that is physical, that is their blood, that is real blood and guts, a warrior, even though it's in a game, but the game is so violent and even often fatal. The people look to Jonathan E. He doesn't start out wanting to be a leader. He becomes one because of his skill. He begins to look into things and starts to think for himself about the history of the world and how did things get this way. We get a very prophetic look at the computer system and the way that knowledge and books are controlled. When it's in your Kindle, what keeps them from taking out things that they don't like out of books that are even classics? Well, it's censored. Can you even find a physical copy? And then someone will say you printed it yourself and you're a conspiracy theorist. You just watch. It's coming. All of this is in Rollerball, and really his refusal to stand down, his refusal to take it, and at the end, though it isn't clear whether he finally dies from his injuries as he skates away from this last bloodbath, the people begin very quietly chanting his name. And then it builds and it builds and it builds. And it leaves you with really the idea that there's a revolution brewing because he stood up to the company. It doesn't matter if he dies. It doesn't matter if he dies and it takes 100 more years. He set something into motion that was beyond the ability of the monopolies to control, because it was bigger than their manipulation of the marketplace. It was something inside the marketplace of ideas of inside people's hearts. And really, I love this movie. I didn't see it in the 70s. I didn't see it until a couple of years ago. I finally watched it for all this time. Grew up hearing about it, hadn't seen it. It's a fabulous film, despite the fact that everything Norman Jewison said about it, honestly, that's a worse movie in my opinion. But what he was trying to make isn't what he ended up making, in my view. My takeaway of it was that it was a very inspiring story of the rise of the human spirit against the monopoly, the inevitable rise of the human spirit, and the one that knows how, the one that has the skill, the ability, and the open enough mind to look for the truth, will always be the one that breaks the chains of all of these people that think that they control the world and that they think they control him, but they don't. Even if they kill his body, they actually cannot stop him, and they cannot stop the seed that he planted. So this is 1975, Rollerball. What did you think?